It was the summer of 1972 when the world almost learned the truth. In the heart of Nevada, under the scorching desert sun, there was a place so secret, so hidden from the world, that even the most powerful governments couldn't seem to control the whispers about it. Area 51, a facility that had long been the subject of speculation, rumors, and stories that no one dared to believe. But that summer, something happened. A low-level employee working at the facility, whose identity has since been erased from all records, walked out of the gates of Area 51 in the dead of night, carrying with him documents that would change everything. This man, known only as Agent X, would later claim that he had witnessed firsthand the government's efforts to conceal one of the biggest secrets in human history: the existence of extraterrestrial life. Inside Area 51, the ultra-secret facility was not just a military testing ground for experimental aircraft, as the government wanted the public to believe. No, something much darker was being hidden beneath those high-security fences and guarded gates. According to Agent X's documents, the U.S. government had been studying alien technology for decades, technology that could bend the laws of physics, manipulate time, and even alter the very fabric of human consciousness. Agent X's report was precise. In 1972, the year he fled, the facility had reached a critical juncture. Evidence of extraterrestrial life had been found, and what was more terrifying than the discovery itself was the fact that the U.S. government had been keeping it from the world for over 25 years. The facility was home to not just the wreckage of a crashed UFO from the infamous Roswell incident, but also the bodies of the beings who had been aboard. The government had conducted covert autopsies, attempting to reverse engineer the technology, and had even made agreements with alien species to keep the truth buried, exchanging knowledge for peace and advanced technology. On the night of Agent X's escape, as he reached a remote location and passed the documents to an anonymous informant, the sky over Area 51 seemed to glow with an unnatural light. That light would be the last thing Agent X saw before disappearing without a trace. His disappearance was later covered up. Just like the documents he had left behind, the U.S. government went into overdrive, making sure no one would ever hear of the contents of Agent X's report. The documents vanished. The stories of alien bodies and flying saucers in Nevada were dismissed as hoaxes or the product of paranoid minds. Yet, despite the efforts to silence the truth, there were always those who would not let go of the mystery. So, what was really happening at Area 51? Could it be true that the government was hiding knowledge of extraterrestrial life from the world? And if it was true, what else were they keeping hidden? The question lingered even after all these years, but the story didn't end in 1972. In fact, it was just the beginning. The truth, as they say, is always more bizarre than fiction. In the early 1950s, a top-secret U.S. military installation was established deep within the Nevada desert. Known only by its designation, Area 51, it quickly became the stuff of legends. What started as a research facility for experimental aircraft soon spiraled into something far more mysterious. Over the years, whispers of UFO sightings, alien encounters, and covert government operations began to surround the base. By 1972, Area 51 had become an impenetrable fortress, heavily guarded by armed personnel and surrounded by a network of fences, sensors, and surveillance technology. The official story was simple. Area 51 was a site for testing military aircraft, including the infamous U-2 spy plane. But beneath the surface, the truth was far more complex, as government insiders and whistleblowers have hinted at for decades. While the public remained unaware of the facility's true purpose, those with access to its secrets knew the real story. For years, the U.S. government had been studying crashed extraterrestrial spacecraft, reverse engineering alien technology, and even engaging in clandestine operations involving extraterrestrial beings. The information was kept locked away from the public eye, hidden behind layers of security and disinformation. In 1972, one man, an anonymous government employee, would make a fateful decision. Armed with classified documents and first-hand knowledge of Area 51's dark secrets, he would attempt to expose what had been hidden from the world. His daring escape would set off a chain of events that would forever change the course of history, or at least the history we thought we knew. In the spring of 1968, a young, ambitious man by the name of Agent X was recruited by the United States Air Force. Little did he know that his life was about to take a turn that would forever change his understanding of reality. At just 24 years old, he was eager to serve his country and prove his worth in a highly classified position. He was selected to join a covert program, a special unit tasked with evaluating and managing top-secret military projects. The assignment? Area 51. Agent X was told little about the facility when he first arrived. He had been given just enough information to clear his security clearance and prepare for the work ahead. When he drove to the facility for the first time under the scorching Nevada sun, the vast desert landscape seemed like the last place on Earth where something so crucial could be hidden. The base was remote, surrounded by high fences, radar systems, and watchtowers. It looked like a place out of a Cold War thriller. At first, Agent X's work was seemingly mundane, securing access to restricted areas, overseeing routine tests of military aircraft, and ensuring that only authorized personnel could enter specific zones. But as the months went by, strange things began to happen. His superiors were often tight-lipped, and rumors of unusual projects kept circulating through the halls, often in hushed tones. It wasn't until late 1970 that Agent X started noticing the first signs that something was terribly wrong. He was assigned to a new area of the base, a part that was so secretive, it wasn't even listed on official maps. It was called Sector 7. The name alone sent chills down his spine, but he thought little of it at first. The more he worked in this new section, the more questions started to form in his mind. There were strange, almost alien devices scattered throughout the rooms he was assigned to. Some were mechanical, others almost organic in appearance. His clearance level was high enough to be permitted inside, but the longer he stayed, the more uneasy he became. The machinery didn't look like anything he'd seen before in any military context. It was too advanced, too refined, and some of the technology seemed not of this world. One day, during a routine inspection of the hangar, he witnessed something that would change everything. Agent X was walking past a row of hangars when he saw something unusual out of the corner of his eye. The hangar doors were slightly open, and a small team of scientists, all in white lab coats, were gathered around a peculiar object. It was metallic, but unlike any aircraft he had seen. The shape was distinctly saucer-like, with sharp angular edges and an eerie glow emanating from within. At first, Agent X thought it was a new, experimental military aircraft, something the government had developed in secret. But as he observed from a distance, a cold chill ran down his spine. The team was not treating the object as they would a new military craft. They were treating it like it was alive. The glow within the craft pulsed rhythmically, almost as though it were breathing. "Agent X, what are you doing here?" A voice suddenly broke his concentration. It was Dr. Simmons, one of the senior scientists at the base. He had a look of concern on his face, as if Agent X had crossed an invisible line. I was just walking through the area, sir," Agent X stammered. Dr. Simmons looked at him carefully for a moment before speaking again. "You're not supposed to be here. This is highly classified, Agent X. You should forget you ever saw anything here." Agent X was stunned by the sudden coldness of the warning. But even more startling was the way Dr. Simmons looked at the object, as if there was something he was too afraid to acknowledge openly. Agent X left quickly, but the image of the object and the unsettling atmosphere in the hangar stayed with him. That night, he lay awake in his barracks, turning the scene over and over in his mind. What was that thing? The following weeks brought even more disturbing revelations. Agent X was transferred to different parts of the facility, often without explanation, and his responsibilities began to feel more and more like he was being pushed into deeper layers of secrecy. He was placed on detail guarding sensitive areas that were rarely, if ever, used. No one explained why. But the strangest thing of all? Every time he entered certain rooms, he could feel a faint, pulsating hum emanating from the walls, as if the facility itself was alive. The hum became louder when he was near the room that contained the object he'd seen earlier. There, the walls were lined with strange metallic symbols and diagrams that he couldn't make sense of. The scientists working in those rooms never spoke about their projects, and if they did, their answers were vague. What was clear to Agent X was that whatever was happening at Area 51, it was not just about military technology, it was about something far darker. As the months passed, Agent X found himself increasingly isolated within the sprawling, secretive complex of Area 51. The more time he spent at the facility, the more disconnected he felt from the outside world. The cryptic nature of his assignments, the unspoken rules of secrecy, and the sense that something far more sinister was lurking beneath the surface, everything began to weigh heavily on him. It wasn't just the mysterious object in the hangar or the unsettling hum from certain rooms that kept him awake at night. There were things far more disturbing happening at Area 51, things that Agent X couldn't simply ignore anymore. In late 1971, he was assigned to a new project. This time, he was tasked with overseeing the security of Lab 13 in Sector 7, a restricted area where experimental research was allegedly taking place. His orders were clear: monitor the perimeter and ensure that only authorized personnel could enter. However, when he arrived at the lab, Agent X immediately sensed that something wasn't right. The air was thick with tension, and the security around the area was unusually tight. The guards were on high alert, and there were fewer personnel entering and exiting than usual. Inside, Agent X found a series of locked doors leading to a vast underground facility, far larger than any structure he had previously encountered at Area 51. The walls were lined with reinforced steel, and the air smelled sterile, almost metallic. It was here that he would finally uncover the truth about the facility. As he passed through a maze of corridors, Agent X's curiosity grew. He had been briefed on the fact that some of the most classified military technology was being tested in the lab. Yet, nothing could prepare him for the discovery that awaited him. Behind one of the steel doors, Agent X stumbled upon what appeared to be a crashed UFO ship unlike any he had seen in his years of military service. It was long, sleek, and metallic, with an eerie, almost otherworldly sheen to it. The craft was suspended in a massive high-tech hangar, surrounded by several armed guards who seemed to be under orders to prevent anyone from getting too close. But Agent X, driven by an overwhelming need to understand, took a chance and approached the ship. The moment his hand grazed the smooth surface of the craft, he felt a shock, a strange electric pulse that surged through his body. For a brief second, everything around him seemed to go still, as if time itself had slowed down. The ship seemed to react to his presence, emitting a faint hum, much like the one he had heard before in the other parts of the base. But this time, it was more intense, almost alive. His heart raced as he looked around. Was this the alien technology that had been hidden from the world for so long? The implications were staggering. If the United States had been in possession of extraterrestrial technology for decades, it meant they had been able to reverse engineer it, perhaps even weaponize it. As he stepped back, trying to make sense of what he had just witnessed, Agent X's mind raced. But the shock was not over. He quickly realized something far darker was at play. The craft wasn't just a vessel. It was a prison. In a secluded section of the lab, Agent X was led into a cold, sterile chamber where something even more horrifying awaited him. There, in a sealed containment pod, lay the remains of extraterrestrial beings. They were small, with elongated limbs and large, black eyes, the kind of beings he had only read about in conspiracy theories. There were multiple bodies, all dismembered and preserved in strange, transparent fluids. Agent X felt a lump in his throat as he took in the sight. These were not just aliens, they were the beings whose technology had been studied, whose biology had been examined under the cruelest of circumstances. The lab technicians who worked tirelessly around the bodies seemed unfazed by their presence. Their work was clinical, as if this was just another day on the job. Agent X knew then that the US government was not just studying the technology, they were actively experimenting on these extraterrestrial beings. He had witnessed firsthand the horrifying reality that had been hidden behind the walls of Area 51 for years. But it wasn't just the aliens and their craft that raised questions. Agent X soon learned that the government had made deals with extraterrestrial life forms. These deals were not about peaceful cooperation, as the public had been led to believe. No, these agreements were about exchanging information and technology in exchange for something far darker. The government was secretly working with alien beings, perhaps even manipulating them for their own gain. Some of the alien technology had been reverse-engineered, while other aspects of it had been used to enhance military operations, including mind control techniques. Agent X couldn't shake the feeling that what was happening at Area 51 went beyond simple experimentation. There was a clear agenda, an agenda to shape the future of mankind, to manipulate it, perhaps even to control it. The deeper he delved into the secrets of the base, the more questions he had. What was the ultimate goal of these experiments? Why had the US government kept such critical information hidden from the public for so long? And most disturbingly, what was being done to the very fabric of human existence itself? One evening, after his shift had ended, Agent X was approached by Dr. Simmons, the senior scientist who had earlier warned him to stay away from the alien craft. This time, however, Simmons was different. His face was pale, his eyes tired. He was not the same man who had once been confident and detached. "Agent X, you've seen too much," Dr. Simmons said quietly, glancing nervously around to ensure they were alone. "There are things here. Things you won't understand. Things that have been going on for far longer than you think." Before Agent X could respond, Simmons handed him a folder. It was thick, filled with papers and documents marked with the highest level of classification. "You need to leave. X, get out while you still can," Simmons whispered, his voice trembling. "What's going on here is bigger than both of us." Agent X took the folder, and with it, the first tangible evidence that would lead him down a path he could never turn back from. He had seen enough, and he now had the documents to prove it. The truth about Area 51 and the horrors that were being hidden there was darker than he could have ever imagined. The documents in Agent X's hands were more than just paperwork. They were the key to understanding the scope of what was happening at Area 51 and the terrifying consequences of the government's secret dealings with extraterrestrial life. As he scanned through the files, his mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. The documents detailed agreements between the US government and various alien species spanning several decades. What Agent X read shocked him to the core. The first agreement, which dated back to the early 1950s, was a covert pact between the US and a species of extraterrestrials that had crash-landed near Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. These beings, known only as the Zephyrians, had offered advanced technology in exchange for a promise of peaceful coexistence. But the documents made it clear that the peaceful terms were quickly discarded in favor of military cooperation. The Zephyrians had provided the US government with alien technology capable of manipulating gravity, traveling faster than the speed of light, and even altering the fabric of space-time. The Zephyrians' technology was beyond comprehension. One of the most shocking revelations was that they had shared the knowledge of how to build anti-gravity engines, which had been used to create advanced aircraft that defied all known laws of physics. The secretive U.S. Air Force projects, including the development of the Aurora and TR-3B craft, were all based on this alien technology, which had been reverse-engineered over decades. But the Zephyrians weren't the only extraterrestrial species involved. There were reports of collaborations with several other alien groups, some of which were far more advanced and far more dangerous. The Reptilians, a race of cold-blooded extraterrestrials, had allegedly offered military technology that could be used to control human minds, an agreement that was struck in the early 1960s. The mind control technology had been tested in underground bunkers beneath Area 51, where countless human subjects were subjected to experiments that manipulated their thoughts and actions. These tests were disguised as routine medical trials, but the reality was much darker. The government had experimented on unwitting civilians, turning them into puppets controlled by the advanced alien technology. The documents included photographs of human test subjects, their eyes wide with terror, as they were subjected to the reptilian mind control techniques. Agent X couldn't believe what he was reading. The U.S. government had not only been in contact with extraterrestrial beings, but had been using their technology to shape human history, all while keeping the public in the dark. The alien technology was not just used for military superiority, it had far-reaching implications. The government had used it to control populations, influence global events, and suppress any efforts to reveal the truth. But it wasn't just weaponry and mind control that had been reverse-engineered. The most chilling part of the documents detailed a time manipulation device, a time-bending technology that could alter the course of history itself. The device was small, about the size of a briefcase, and was referred to as the Chrono Machine. According to the documents, it was capable of creating time rifts, allowing individuals to travel back and forth through time, though with significant risks. The technology was incredibly unstable, and tests on it had led to several disastrous incidents, including the disappearance of personnel who had attempted to use it. This time manipulation device, Agent X realized, could change everything. It could rewrite history, erase past mistakes, and alter the balance of power in the world. It could even give its users the power to control the future. The implications were staggering. Agent X's pulse quickened as he flipped through the files, his hands shaking. The deeper he went, the darker the truth became. The U.S. government, in collaboration with extraterrestrial species, had not only been experimenting on humans and reverse engineering alien technology, but had also been actively altering the course of history, and in doing so, they were hiding the truth about the existence of extraterrestrial life and their influence on the world. As he reached the final section of the documents, Agent X's eyes widened. There was mention of a secret group within the government, a group of elites, known only as the Majestic 12, who were responsible for overseeing these covert operations. This shadow organization had been making deals with extraterrestrial species since the 1940s, and their goal was to maintain control over the world's most powerful technologies. Agent X's mind raced. The Majestic 12 were more powerful than he had ever imagined. They had access to alien technology, mind control, and even the ability to alter time itself. Their influence stretched to the highest levels of government, military, and science. They had been controlling the world from the shadows, shaping events to fit their own agenda. As Agent X absorbed the full extent of what he had discovered, a cold realization settled over him. He could no longer ignore the truth. He had been part of a system that had manipulated human history, suppressed knowledge, and covered up the existence of extraterrestrial life for decades. The government's actions were not only unethical, they were dangerous. But there was one problem. The Majestic 12 and the government were aware of the dangers of exposure. Anyone who attempted to reveal the truth was disappeared, their existence erased from the records, their families silenced. Agent X had seen it happen before. Whistleblowers had vanished without a trace, their fate sealed by the government's reach. The fear of what might happen to him was real. But the documents were too important. The world needed to know the truth about Area 51, about the government's dealings with extraterrestrials, and about the horrific experiments that had been conducted on innocent people. With his heart pounding, Agent X made his decision. He would flee the facility, take the documents with him, and expose everything. He knew it would be dangerous. He knew there was a high probability that he wouldn't make it out alive. But it didn't matter. The truth had to come to light. That night, under the cover of darkness, Agent X packed the documents into a small, waterproof bag and slipped out of the facility. He had studied the security systems for months and knew exactly how to bypass them. But as he neared the exit, a terrible thought struck him. He wasn't the only one who had been part of this secret world. There were others too. Others who would stop at nothing to keep him quiet. With his heart racing, he stepped into the desert night, leaving behind the only life he had ever known, and in doing so, becoming a fugitive from the very system he had once served. The desert air was cold and dry as Agent X moved swiftly through the shadows of Area 51. Every step felt like it echoed through the night. Yet the vast emptiness of the Nevada wilderness swallowed the sound. He knew the stakes. If he was caught, his life would be over. The government's reach was long, and there were no second chances for whistleblowers who dared to expose its secrets. He had spent months planning this escape. Every detail had been meticulously calculated, from the security cameras to the patrols. He knew that Area 51 was surrounded by miles of barren desert and protected by high-tech sensors. But with the documents in his possession, he couldn't afford to take the usual escape routes. Every path had been monitored, and the government would stop at nothing to ensure that the truth remained buried. Agent X's only hope lay in a small abandoned airstrip he had learned about during his time at the facility. It was located far to the south of the base, near a patch of scrubland. The airstrip was old, forgotten by most, but it had one key advantage. It wasn't under constant surveillance. He knew it would take hours to reach it on foot, but the alternative was certain death. The government would track him down before he could even get close to any populated area, so he had to move fast. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly as Agent X navigated the desert landscape. He moved in a zigzag pattern, avoiding main roads and any signs of human activity. Every rustle in the wind, every distant sound made him pause. Was he being followed? Was this all part of some trap set by the government? The thought haunted him, but he pushed it aside. There was no turning back. Hours later, exhausted and dehydrated, Agent X finally saw the faint outline of the airstrip in the distance. His heart raced. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes now. The plane he had arranged for this escape was a small, private aircraft one that could get him out of the country before the government could react. But there was one problem. The plane had to be manually unlocked, and the pilot wasn't expecting him for another hour. Agent X reached the airstrip just as the first light of dawn began to paint the desert sky. His legs were heavy, his mind foggy from the lack of sleep and the exhaustion of his journey. But the sight of the small aircraft waiting for him was a welcome relief. His escape was within reach. But just as he approached the plane, he heard the unmistakable sound of a helicopter in the distance. His blood ran cold. The government was already on his tail. Damn it! He muttered, scrambling toward the aircraft. He knew he had little time to spare. As he reached the plane, he saw the figure of the pilot, a man with a rugged face who had agreed to help him. But instead of the casual greeting he had expected, the pilot's face was grim. "They know you're here, the pilot said in a low voice. "I've been watching the skies. We need to move now." Agent X didn't need to ask how the pilot knew. It was clear that his escape had already been compromised. The helicopter's sound grew louder, the whooshing of the blades cutting through the air. Agent X wasted no time. He handed over the bag of documents to the pilot, who quickly stowed them in the cockpit. The engine roared to life, and the small plane began to taxi down the runway. But before it could take off, a sharp burst of gunfire echoed across the airstrip. The helicopter was getting closer. "Go, go, go!" Agent X shouted, adrenaline surging through his veins. The plane lurched forward, and Agent X barely held on as it accelerated. The helicopter loomed above, its lights flashing in the early morning sky. Agent X could hear the rotor blades slicing through the air, closing in on them. The plane hit the runway with a jolt and soared into the sky, but not without a few close calls. The helicopter, now dangerously close, opened fire, bullets peppering the ground around the plane. The roar of the engines drowned out everything else as the plane ascended rapidly, climbing higher into the sky. Agent X could feel the pressure of their pursuers, but he refused to look back. His eyes were fixed on the horizon. With every second, the gap between them and the helicopter widened. It was clear that the government had mobilized its resources quickly, but the small plane's speed and agility were enough to shake off their attackers for now. As the plane soared higher, Agent X felt a fleeting sense of relief. But the danger wasn't over. The government had eyes everywhere, and the Majestic 12 were not known for letting their secrets slip so easily. This was only the beginning of the hunt. Agent X's heart still pounded in his chest as he looked at the documents in the cockpit. He had the proof, the damning evidence of the government's collaboration with extraterrestrial species, the secret technologies, and the horrific experiments conducted in Area 51. But now, the real danger was just beginning. He knew he couldn't stay in the United States. The government would be on his tail, relentless in their pursuit of the truth he carried. His escape wasn't just about leaving the desert, it was about disappearing completely, erasing every trace of himself from a world that had already decided he was a threat. As the plane flew farther into the distance, Agent X knew he had to get these documents into the right hands, people who would expose the truth to the world. People who wouldn't be intimidated by the power of the Majestic 12. But first, he had to survive. And survival meant keeping a low profile, staying off the radar, and trusting no one. The world would eventually know the truth about Area 51, but the price of that truth would be high. And Agent X was already beginning to understand that, for the rest of his life, he would be looking over his shoulder. The sun was beginning to set as Agent X's small plane cut through the silent sky. He felt the tension in his chest, like an invisible shadow was closing in, ready to swallow him at any moment. The pilot, Tom, kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, his hands firmly gripping the controls. The feeling of being hunted was almost tangible. Agent X knew there was little distance between him and the men who would destroy his life if they found out where he was headed. The government would not tolerate a threat this big to its existence. It was a sense of complete disconnection, a flight that felt more like a nightmare than a plan for survival. He could no longer trust anyone, not the pilot, not anyone. What he was carrying was more dangerous than anything he had ever faced before. The evidence he held could destroy what was left of a truth that had been manipulated for decades, a truth those in power were willing to protect at any cost. He already knew the Majestic 12, the shadowy organization that ran things at the heart of Area 51, would not rest until he was dead. He watched Tom for a moment. The pilot wore a tired expression, but there was a certain understanding in his eyes. The risk was clear to both of them. It wouldn't be a surprise if the government had already begun hunting any trace of their escape. And as they flew further away from the mountains, Agent X couldn't shake the feeling that they were being tracked. It wouldn't take long before the government's reach found them. They had resources far beyond what most could comprehend. Satellites, drones, covert operatives, all focused on keeping this secret buried. A sudden alarm broke his concentration, sending a chill down his spine. Radar alert! Tom's hand shot to the controls, his eyes narrowed in alarm. "They found us," Tom muttered, almost as if speaking to himself. "We've got incoming." Agent X didn't need to ask who it was. A military jet was already closing in on them from the distance, its shape unmistakable against the dimming sky. It was too close for comfort. The government was already making its move. The Majestic 12 had no tolerance for leaks. Agent X was a liability, and they would stop at nothing to take him down. Tom banked the plane hard to the left, trying to shake off the pursuing jet, but it was clear their efforts were futile. The jet, a formidable fighter, was closing in with alarming speed. The government's forces had mobilized faster than Agent X had anticipated. They weren't going to let him get away with exposing everything. The fighter pilot likely knew exactly what he had: proof of the extraterrestrial technology, the government's dark history, and the horrific experiments carried out in Area 51. Taking him out was the only option. Agent X felt the rush of adrenaline as the jet closed in. They couldn't outrun it. The fighter jet was too fast. He could hear the sound of the engines getting louder, but Tom didn't hesitate. He yanked the controls to the right, heading for a narrow gap in the mountain range ahead. It was their only chance. The jet was close behind, but Tom's reflexes were sharp. They darted through the mountains, weaving between the cliffs in an attempt to lose the fighter. The fighter followed, relentlessly pursuing them, but the gap was small, and Tom had the advantage of knowing these mountains like the back of his hand. For a brief moment, Agent X thought they might actually make it. But then came the sound of gunfire, a warning shot that tore through the air, ripping past them with a deafening crack. The plane shuddered violently, throwing them off course. The fighter wasn't playing games. It was sending a clear message: get out of the sky or be destroyed. The plane dropped suddenly, the nose dipping dangerously as Tom fought to maintain control. They were heading straight for a steep mountain ridge, and Agent X could feel his stomach drop. This was it. They might not make it out. But then, a miracle. With a powerful thrust of the controls, Tom managed to level out the plane, avoiding the ridge by mere feet. The fighter jet was still behind them, but for a split second, it seemed like they had a chance. They were deep in the mountains now, and the dense trees below offered some cover. But the jet wasn't done. They could hear its engines, its missiles preparing to strike. Tom pushed the throttle forward, forcing the plane to climb higher, trying to outrun the jet. Agent X could feel his heart racing, the cold sweat on his palms. The jet was almost on top of them now. He couldn't look back. If they didn't shake it off soon, they were done for. Tom glanced at Agent X, his face set with grim determination. Hold on. The plane raced toward the tree line below, but the jet wasn't giving up. With one final push, Tom angled the plane down and toward a gap between the trees, a narrow path that led into a dense forest. The jet was still right behind them, close enough to touch. Agent X braced himself for impact as they tore through the trees, the branches scraping against the fuselage. But somehow, they made it. The fighter jet hesitated for a moment, caught in the thick forest, but it wasn't enough. The gap had allowed them to slip away, just for now. But they weren't out of danger yet. Agent X could hear the roar of the jet's engines trying to cut through the trees, but Tom was already pushing the plane as fast as it could go. The trees thinned ahead, and they could see an opening, a path that would lead them toward safety. But the jet was relentless. Then, a massive explosion ripped through the air. The fighter jet had launched its missiles. Tom jerked the plane upward, narrowly avoiding the explosion that sent a shockwave through the trees. The plane wobbled dangerously, and Agent X felt the force of the impact, but they were still alive. Suddenly, there was a sickening lurch, and the plane slammed into the mountainside. The force of the impact threw Agent X forward, the world spinning out of control. They had crashed hard. The world went silent. When the dust cleared, the first thing Agent X felt was pain. His body ached, his head pounded. The plane had been badly damaged, but somehow they had survived the crash. He looked around in confusion. The cockpit was a wreck, but Tom was still conscious, staring at him through bloodied eyes. "We're not out yet," Tom said, his voice hoarse. The sound of helicopters filled the air. Agent X's heart raced as he realized the gravity of the situation. They had crashed, but they hadn't escaped. They were surrounded. The government would be here soon, and they would make sure nothing remained of his escape. But for now, the only thing that mattered was survival. And the documents, the truth still had to get out. The crash was catastrophic. The world around Agent X was a blur of spinning metal, glass, and smoke. He could hear the whirring of the helicopters growing closer, their blades cutting through the thick mountain air, but the chaos of the crash left him disoriented. His body ached, but it was the cold that made him realize the danger wasn't over. The Majestic 12 weren't just about to let him disappear. They would track him down, finish what they started, and ensure that the truth he carried never reached the light of day. He gradually reached for the bag that contained the documents, the irrefutable evidence of what was hidden at Area 51. It had survived the crash, remarkably intact. Agent X pulled it close to his chest, clutching it like his lifeline. In that bag lay the truth that could tear down the very foundation of the government's secrecy. "Tom?" Agent X coughed, his voice hoarse, barely a whisper. The pilot didn't answer at first. The wreckage had thrown him forward into the dashboard, and it was clear he was badly injured, but still alive. His eyes fluttered open, his hands shaking as he pushed himself up, grimacing in pain. "We need to move now," Tom said, his voice strained. The urgency was palpable. Agent X didn't need any more convincing. The Majestic 12 would have already scrambled their resources, and with the helicopters closing in, they were running out of time. They could hear the choppers above, the distinct sound of military units descending. The search for Agent X was already underway. But there was no way they could outrun them in the wrecked plane, and no way to fight back against such powerful forces. They had to hide. Tom grimaced as he stood up, favoring his right leg. "The forest," he muttered. "We have to disappear into the forest." The two men staggered through the wreckage, barely able to stay on their feet. Agent X, more focused than ever, kept the bag close, ensuring the precious documents were secure. They could still hear the helicopter's rotors getting louder, the faint voices of soldiers calling out orders to each other. "They'll have trackers on us soon," Tom said. "We have to get off the grid." Agent X nodded, his pulse racing. They had barely any time. The surrounding forest offered the only cover. Their goal now was simple: survive and get as far away from the wreckage as possible. He knew the helicopters would keep searching, scanning the area for signs of life, and their best chance to avoid detection was to disappear into the trees and hope they wouldn't be found. The forest was dense, the trees tall and thick with branches. They moved swiftly but quietly, pushing through the underbrush, trying to stay low. Every snap of a twig underfoot seemed like it would betray their position, but they had no choice but to keep moving. The helicopters above would eventually have to leave, but the real danger lay in the soldiers they had deployed on the ground. Agent X's thoughts raced. He couldn't allow the Majestic 12 to find him. Not now, not when he was so close. The information in his possession had to be exposed. If he could just reach the safe house, the one place where he knew the documents could be delivered to someone who would take them seriously, then maybe, just maybe, the truth would get out. But Tom was injured, and their escape plan had been compromised. They couldn't rely on anyone else, and there was no time to waste. They pushed forward, moving deeper into the forest, staying off the beaten paths. The sound of the helicopters grew fainter, but it was replaced with the sounds of boots on the ground, the soldiers who had been deployed to sweep the area. Agent X's heart hammered in his chest as he pressed on. No one could know what he knew. They stumbled upon a small clearing, and for a moment, Agent X thought they might be able to rest, catch their breath, and regroup. But Tom's pained grunt quickly reminded him of the danger still closing in on them. "They'll know we're here soon," Tom said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to keep moving." Agent X glanced around, trying to find some sign of shelter, but the forest was just endless trees, shadows, and the overwhelming sound of their breathing and footsteps. Every second felt like an eternity. They continued on, pushing themselves past exhaustion, heading toward a ridge that Agent X remembered from his time in the desert. From there, they might be able to spot a road, or even a path where they could escape into the night. Every step they took seemed to echo, as if the forest itself was conspiring against them. Then, suddenly, the crunch of footsteps sounded behind them. Someone was too close. They hadn't been careful enough. Agent X spun around just in time to see two soldiers emerging from the trees, their rifles raised. There was no time to think. He grabbed Tom's arm and pulled him toward a dense thicket, ducking into the undergrowth. "Run," he hissed. They bolted, dodging between the trees, moving as fast as their injured bodies would allow. The soldiers called out in pursuit, and Agent X could hear their footsteps closing in. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing. The Majestic 12 were closing in. It was no longer just a question of survival. It was a question of whether they would get the documents to safety before the government silenced them for good. The chase continued, with Agent X and Tom growing more desperate as the soldiers tracked them through the forest. But in the distance, there was a glimmer of hope, a car, a sign of civilization, and perhaps their last chance to get the truth out. With no time to spare, they pushed forward, knowing that with each step they took, they were one step closer to uncovering the deepest secrets of Area 51. The forest around them seemed endless, the trees growing thicker and the shadows longer as Agent X and Tom pushed on. The sound of footsteps in pursuit was unmistakable, growing louder with every passing moment. They had no choice now but to keep moving. Their breathing was heavy, their bodies battered, but the weight of the documents they carried, the truth that had to get out, kept them going. With every snap of a twig underfoot, the soldiers closed in. Agent X knew they had no time to waste. The pursuit was relentless, and each step they took deeper into the woods felt like it brought them closer to their doom. But he refused to stop. The world needed to know the truth about Area 51, about the alien technology the government had kept hidden for decades. "They're close," Tom panted, his voice barely a whisper. Agent X nodded, his thoughts racing. The forest was now their prison, a maze of trees that seemed to trap them at every turn. But in the distance, just beyond the trees, he could see a glimmer of light, a road, barely visible between the branches. It was a chance. They could reach it, and from there, they might be able to find help, or at least get to a place where the Majestic 12 couldn't easily reach them. But they were running out of time. The crackling of underbrush behind them was now unmistakable. The soldiers were getting closer. Their voices carried through the trees, their searchlights flashing in the distance. Agent X felt a surge of panic, but he pushed it down. He couldn't afford to lose focus now. Every step was critical. "Keep going, just a little further." Agent X urged Tom, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. Tom nodded, but he was clearly slowing down. His leg injury was worsening, and the strain of their escape was taking its toll. Agent X glanced back at him, torn between wanting to help him and knowing they had to move faster. There was no time for hesitation. The faint hum of a helicopter overhead reminded him that they were not just being pursued on the ground. The Majestic 12 had control over everything, from satellites to aerial support. They wouldn't stop until they had eliminated every possible threat. "We need to split up," Agent X said suddenly, his mind working in overdrive. Tom looked at him in confusion, but Agent X had no time to explain. "You take the road. I'll try to draw them away." "No," Tom gasped, shaking his head. "We stay together." "I'll lead them away," Agent X insisted. "You need to get to that road, now. I'll catch up." Reluctantly, Tom nodded, knowing it was their only shot. Without another word, Agent X veered off, taking a sharp turn into a denser part of the forest. He moved quickly, deliberately making noise-snapping branches, kicking rocks, anything to divert the soldiers' attention away from Tom. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was the only one they had. Behind him, the voices of the soldiers grew louder. He could hear them shouting, their footsteps crunching through the underbrush. The helicopters above were still circling, but the ground pursuit was closer now. Agent X pressed forward, ducking behind a massive tree, his breath ragged. He could hear the soldiers approaching, their voices unmistakable. "We've got him! Over there!" The searchlights flickered as the soldiers spread out, but Agent X didn't wait to see what would happen next. His heart was racing, but he focused on the task at hand. He had to make sure Tom got to the road. He knew the Majestic 12 would never stop. Their pursuit would be relentless until they were certain no one would ever reveal the truth. He took a deep breath and dashed forward, weaving between trees, staying low to the ground. The soldiers were closing in, but Agent X had the advantage of familiarity. He had spent enough time in the wilderness, in the Nevada desert, to know how to use the landscape to his advantage. But this time, the stakes were higher than ever. "Move, damn it!" Agent X muttered to himself as he pushed through the underbrush, his eyes scanning for any sign of the soldiers. In the distance, he could hear them shouting, getting closer. They were now only a few steps away from where he had been moments ago. But Agent X had done enough. He'd drawn them away. Now the rest was up to Tom. Suddenly, the sound of helicopter blades became deafening. They were coming in fast, and it was clear they were locking onto his position. But there was no way to escape them, not now. The searchlights from above were a blinding reminder that the government was always watching. They could see everything, and they would never let him get away. But then, something unexpected happened. Out of nowhere, a shot rang out, followed by the unmistakable sound of a car engine. Tom had reached the road. Agent X froze, listening as the sound of tires on gravel grew louder. Someone had come for them. The soldiers heard it too. They hesitated for a moment, their attention shifting, and that was all Agent X needed. He dove into a nearby ravine, his heart racing. He heard the soldiers shout in frustration, their voices distant now as they were pulled in the direction of the approaching car. Agent X didn't look back. His only focus was getting to Tom. His plan had worked, but there was still no time to waste. They had to get to safety before the government closed in on them completely. He scrambled up the steep sides of the ravine, pushing himself harder than he ever had before. His body was screaming in pain, but he didn't care. The truth was slipping through his fingers, and he had to make sure it reached the world. The car engine grew louder. Finally, Agent X spotted Tom through the trees, standing near an old beat-up sedan parked just off the road. Tom's face was a mix of exhaustion and relief as he saw Agent X approach. "We're not out of the woods yet, but we're getting there," Tom said, his voice strained. Agent X didn't respond, but he knew that this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. They had barely escaped, and there were still questions that needed answers. The Majestic 12 wouldn't give up. They never did. But for now, they had made it. The documents were safe, and the truth was still alive.